Hello, you are listening to Deeply Curious. My name is Cody Jensen, and joining me in our New York City studio apartment is Sarah Jensen, my wife.
Hello.
And also joining us for the first time second guest on Deeply Curious.
Wowzers.
And the best looking guest we've ever had, Josh Kluge.
Who else has been your guest?
Josh Kluge.
I was like, wait a second, I feel bad.
No, we've had a few others.
John
but
Hill,
I wasn't going to
Mace.
name them to specifically call out who.
Oh no, John's
Sorry.
way better looking than me.
Yeah. In this episode, we decided we were going to talk about gear.
Yeah.
So specifically, art making and the gear needed to create that art, and I guess how we all get caught up in the gear side of things, instead of the art creating side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
So that's what we're going to dive into. Before we do that, I just want to let you know that this podcast is produced by Rob Evans and Greg Stratton and Christian B. Schmidt.
Hey.
Those are producer level patrons over on our Patreon page, which you can go to by typing in Jensen AV Club. We call our Patreon page the Jensen AV Club, and this is a premium membership platform that basically allows you to help support this show and allows us to keep materialism and consumerism at bay and create art that matters instead of art that sells. And so you can join the Jensen AV Club and get exclusive perks and deeper access to us as artists and things like that. You can check it out again by going to jensenav.club. Thank you so much to all of our patrons.
Yes.
And let's get on with the show.
Let's do it.
So we have had this conversation many times about gear and art. It's just something I feel that I think everybody goes through it.
Yeah. Well, I think on some level, it makes you feel good. There's this idea that they've talked about before, or that I've heard before, about how like you shouldn't tell people your plans or your goals, because telling them is it gives you that little satisfying feeling, and that like now you don't actually do it. I feel like that's what buying gear is. Like it gives you that kind of satisfied feeling, like I'm doing something, I accomplished it, but then like it's not actually what you should be doing, but it gives us that like minimum effort, maximum output kind of idea. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's how I feel anyway. Like I love like researching and buying and like getting prepared for a thing, but then that satisfies my my need to do something. So then it's like the actual work it takes to get better at something is a lot more difficult than buying it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think that I think one thing to I guess center the conversation for those that are listening and maybe like, wait, what? What are we like? What are we talking about? So I think that a prime example that pretty much everybody can relate to is the example that I've used often about photography and how you'll see somebody and they'll have like amazing photos. You know, they take your family photos or your senior photos or your wedding photos, you know, whatever it is. And somebody will compliment the photographer and be like, wow, these photos are so good. What kind of camera do you have?
Yeah.
And they attribute the quality of the photo to the quality of the camera instead of attributing the quality of the photo to the quality of the photographer. And yes, gear matters, but our argument that I think that we're going to be making is that only to a point.
Yeah.
And so I think that my favorite example, I guess, antithesis of what kind of is an example of this is just the fact that if you were to go have an amazing meal, you would not, after the meal, look at the chef and say, wow, that was like one of the best meals I've ever had. What kind of oven do you have?
Right.
And we don't compliment the chef on their cooking utensils. We compliment the chef on the taste of the food.
Right.
And so, you know, I think that it's a twofold conversation, I think. What causes us to care about so much about gear? And then is it something we should actually care about?
Well, I think, at least for me, what causes me to care about gear is that feeling I get like, oh my gosh, I'm doing something worthwhile and like this, you know, like I'm pursuing something. But it does like end up satisfying that piece of me that like is like, okay, cool, I don't need to do anything more.
Yeah.
You know?
The quote you said initially about we should never tell people, or like the whole
Yeah, don't tell people your plans because that gives you, it tricks your brain into thinking that you've done it already, basically.
I should probably stop talking in life. It's kind of, whenever you said that, I was like, oh dang, that's so me. But I think it's that whole, it's almost like your eyes are set so much on, if I get this, then I can
Right.
become this, as far as like, or I could create this. And so your mind is so fixated on acquiring that gear to where the reason that you're acquiring it is irrelevant and it's just all about getting it. And then that in and of itself is the goal, is the acquiring, as opposed to what acquiring it enables for you, that you're just kind of like, okay, check. Like there's these studio monitors that I use at home whenever I'm just like goofing around on stuff. And for the longest time, I was like, man, I would probably create so much more if I had good studio monitors, blah, blah, blah. I spent all this time getting these monitors, and then the exact same thing that I wasn't doing at home that I still do in the other environments. But I was thinking, why do I do all my creation outside of home? Why do I do it at other people's houses or at work or wherever, and why am I not doing it at home? It's like, oh, because I don't have like that really good speakers. So I get the really good speakers, and it literally doesn't change anything.
Yeah. It's kind of the same, not even in art, but just like, a good example I think is like whenever you get really into the idea that you're going to work out, and so you buy like the $200 running shoes, and you buy the like Lululemon tights and or whatever, leggings, and you know, the really nice workout gear, and then it just sits in your closet forever.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same idea.
Getting that Billy Ray Cyrus Fendi sports bra.
Exactly.
The way that I've kind of come to look at this is that a lot of times we hide our insecurities as an artist behind the purchasing of gear.
Yeah.
And so,
like, it's going to make you more legitimate.
right, it's like instead of being confident and knowing like, okay, I am a great, let's say filmmaker or whatever it is, instead of leaning into, making good movies or making good videos or making good photos or making good music or, making good furniture, we hide our insecurities of what we are creating in the pursuit of purchasing gear. And so it's like, instead of focusing on those things, I'm like obsessing, watching every single YouTube video I can possibly find on all of these cameras. Like which camera has the highest possible bit rate and the lowest possible grain, and like all this stuff, and like, oh wow, that camera sucks, I'm gonna get this camera because that camera's gonna make me look like I'm a boss. And it's like, it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, if your storytelling and your creative abilities as a filmmaker, they can be applied to an amazing film shot on a GoPro, that is not going to increase the level of storytelling and creativity whenever you used a high-end like $30,000 camera. Like it helps to a point, but if you are basically, if you suck as an artist, which we all do, the art isn't going to be made better by the accumulation of better gear.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is a good way to hide, or not even hide, but like maybe even run from those emotions and like pretend like they don't exist. Instead, I mean, we even in life we do that. We like distract ourselves because we don't want to like admit the truth of something uncomfortable. It's that same idea, I think. Yeah.
Well, and something I've noticed about myself too, because I was watching tons of these behind the scenes clips for different TV shows and things like that, and I have found myself going on streams of finding out about gear, and I'm really starting to think that the pursuit of knowing about gear is just a completely different interest in like brainwave than actual creation.
Yeah.
Like I think that you can I think that you can be a gear file, but not actually be a musician or actually be a photographer, actually be a designer or a writer or anything. You can just be somebody that's so interested in what it does, but and yet just because you're interested in what it does doesn't mean that you're actually the one who's should be creating it. It's just you're a curious person. And so it's like it's almost the reason you're interested in how it works is because really at heart you're an engineer as opposed to a composition person, whether that be you're composing music, you're composing your paintings, you're composing video type of thing. It's just your engineer brain has attached itself to something else type of thing.
Interesting. That's a good thought.
Yeah, I definitely could see that for sure. But I also, well, maybe goes along with it, but, and this is going to be a harsh, bold statement, but I stand by it.
That is welcome to Cody Jensen.
Yeah. That I have found or experienced that the people who obsess the most about gear make the worst art.
Yeah, well, because I think the beauty of art is in the, I guess, mystery, but it's in the like in between things that you can't really explain or describe or whatever. Yeah. It's in the messing around. It's in the like tinkering, I guess you would say. That's where the art actually comes from. Maybe
in your stream, but I know in the music world, I just know some dudes that like crazy gearheads, like my buddy David, like crazy gearhead. Every time I'm driving through a city, he's on Craigslist for that city, and he's literally sent me on random 2-hour detours on my way to Nashville. He's like, hey, could you pop into this spot in Arkansas? And I pick up this 1970s analog tape machine for and he's like crazy gearhead, but he has a crazy studio in Nashville type of thing. And so he's somebody that I'm like, you're the best of both worlds because you're a crazy gearhead and you also are the composer. So, but I know quite a few guys in the music stream that.
Well, I think you can be a crazy gearhead and also crazy talented, but I think the problem is when you put gear ahead of talent.
Yeah.
Right.
The way I would say is that most of the people, I guess, that I am picturing whenever I say that, they have not outgrown the gear they already have.
Yeah. Right.
And so that's one thing that I have always kind of harped on, I guess, is that, you know, all of us, I think it might be just because of the materialistic culture that we live in. We just get so obsessed with getting the right gear. And maybe it has to do with our culture of like reviewing and that, you know, any possible thing that we ever do. Like if we're going to go to a lunch spot, we like look it up to see how many stars it has to make sure we're going to the best lunch spot.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, it's all about getting the best lunch, you know, the best guitar, the best camera, you know, the best SD card to go in the camera. It's like, none of that really, like, who's to say what's the best? But we're so obsessed with this that I think that gets us into, it makes us all obsessed with getting gear. Yeah. And instead of actually focusing on our talent. And I think for me, the way that I like to say is that the time to upgrade your gear is whenever your gear is actually holding you back from creating what you want to create.
Oh, absolutely.
And that question sometimes I feel like maybe if you're not self-aware enough, that question can be like, oh, of course it is, because it doesn't have the right bit rate.
Yeah. Right.
You know, and you're like, no, that's not true. Yeah. Like the majority of us never outgrow our gear. It's that we get bored.
Yeah.
And it's the disparity between taste and talent.
I was gonna say the Ira Glass quote. It seems like it could fit here because it really is that. Like, your taste is so much higher than your talent, so you think, okay, well, how can I compensate?
Yeah.
And you compensate with gear. We think.
Yeah. And then you can't make the gear do what you want to do, so you buy the preset package.
Exactly.
So that you can achieve what the gear is capable of doing for your taste, but
or
your
you
talent
give it
couldn't
all
get
up
there.
because nothing actually is working.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and I was thinking about this little example of how when I think I was 13 years old, I got this delay pedal that had only a couple settings on it, and one of them was a looper, and you could loop stuff into it, and then you could add effects while it was looping. It was just the classic at DL4, if that means anything to anybody. Just I loved that pedal, and I would run a DD20 into the DL4, and just it was awesome. And so you could also, if you double tapped one of the buttons, it could slow it down in halftime, and then it would also octavate it down because you're slowing it down type of thing. And then you could then record, slow down, and speed it up. So it's just like all these crazy variations. Nerding out. Nerd alert. But anyways, the amount of like craziness, I would get home from school and I would go up to my room and would just play and play and play and play and play. And then I found out my tuner, there was like this cheap $30 little music store, like band music store tuner. It had a microphone on it for tuning the instrument, and then it had a line input for if you were to plug an instrument into it, and it had a line output. And I figured out that you could plug the line output into the pedal, into the amplifier, and use the microphone on the tuner as a microphone, and you could record into it. And so that was like my literal setup. It was this flat tuner that the microphone was right here in the middle, and I would like lay it on the shelf and angle myself over it and then sing into it. Hopefully I'm like, at the right height or whatever. So whenever puberty would happen, I'd have to figure out, I got to stand on books now because I'm a little bit higher than the shelf. But that was my experience with all of this in order to like get crazy sounds because of the limitations that it was doing. I was then exploring it on guitar going into it, and then was like, well, what if I did all of that with a microphone and then did the slow down thing? And then what if I record the guitar, unplug it, it's looping, plug the mic in, sing over it? And I'm doing all of this because of what's limited. Then what was it, like 10 years later or something like that, I get this program for synthesis on my computer, and this thing is crazy capable. It's, it has just what it does, the amount of stuff that's been recorded into it, all these different synth libraries have been recorded into it, and the amount of adjustments that you can make, blah, 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 is endless. And because it is so complicated, I have not been able to, I haven't taken the time to sit down, and I've just settled for, well, I know JL's got this dope sound on it, so hey, yo, how do I do that on this? And my friend Seth has this, so how could I do it on this? And okay, hey, somebody call Ben, have Ben come and make the adjustments, because the time it took to get Ben's sound, I don't want to spend because this thing's so vast. Whereas my little pedal, because it was so limited, it seemed conquerable. So I would spend the time. Whereas if I spent the amount of time on the program that I got 10 years later that I did on the pedal, I would probably be way better at it. But because it had so much access and so much editing ability, I was so overwhelmed and didn't even engage it.
Well, I think oftentimes creativity comes from limitations.
Yeah, I mean
that's what like creativity is, right? It's like creative problem solving, and like you have this thing that you can't get around, so you find a creative way to get around it, right?
Yeah.
But like I think also if you pay attention, art a lot of times I think comes from like simplifying things. And all of these people who have like reached this level of artistic ability, what do they always do? They go back to the beginning. They go back to when they only had this like 2-plug whatever thing that they couldn't do anything with. That's what they go back to make a masterpiece.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think there's like something opposite of like paring down to find the thing that we feel like we need more and more to figure it out. But really all you have to do is pare it all down.
I mean, it goes back to that really famous quote that I can't remember who it's attributed by, so I'm going to say it's by Cody Jensen.
No, you said that. I remember.
I remember. Limitations are the mother of invention.
Yes.
Yeah, you said that.
Yeah. And it's just with everything, it's like truly like the limitations are what leads to invention and connections that were never made before, and and also in creativity, like the most creative things are the things that were made under limitations.
Because
totally.
you have that like when you have all the options you pick nothing kind of idea, so like instead you give yourself like a little box to work within, and like your brain is like, okay, I can do something with this, you know, versus oh my God, where do I even start?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And so then I think, what would it look like if we then almost tricked ourselves into that approach with things that have so many options?
Yeah, like take one at a time and practice it.
So what if I had the same approach with this endless editable, adjustable program that I had with my DL4, and say, I'm only going to allow myself to play with the ACAC words. It's Sunday. We were taking the day off from words today. What if I only allowed myself to play with the attack, decay, sustain, release?
Right.
And that little section, I'm not going to worry about the LFO. I'm not going to worry about cut. I'm not going to worry about all that stuff. But I'm only limiting to that section. Or what would it look like if, I know I can adjust the balance. I know I can adjust the contrast, but I'm only going to allow myself to play with ISO today.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is, well, if you think about like usually how a song is written, it's because there's like one piece of information that somebody wants to get across.
Yeah.
Whether it's like a line or literally one word or a story plot, like it's one single thing that somebody's trying to communicate. So like just take that and apply it to literally everything else. You're like trying to communicate one thing. What is that one simple thing? And then like, work around that.
That reminds me of this whole limitation in creating art, in that the other day I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about limitations, and they ended up telling this story of Keith Jarrett. And Keith Jarrett is a jazz pianist.
Yeah.
And he had he was on tour and he was playing concerts, and he went to this venue early to check out. They said to meet the piano and get.
Oh, I love those little comments.
So to get to know the piano he's going to be playing with that night. There's like 15. This is a 1,500 seat theater, so it's sold out. And he shows up, and in this 1,500 seat theater is like a baby grand piano. I guess I can't remember it. What they said was the piano was too small.
So it's like a big concert hall. You're expecting a massive grand,
and so
you get in there,
the piano itself wouldn't even reach the back of the room.
Can't project. Gotcha.
Yeah. Then he starts playing, and I don't remember how many, 16 of the keys are don't even really work.
Oh,
and then
dead.
it's
Wow.
and then it's really out of tune, and can't it's really hard to get into tune, and then the pedals were not working right either. And so he said, I can't do this.
Yeah.
No. And the promoter, I guess, was somebody that, I think they said it was a young woman, and she was really wanted to make this work, and I think maybe it was one of her first times doing this or something. And so
didn't read the writer.
Yeah. And so he wanted to
Give
basically
her
she
a
was begging
shot.
please do this concert. And he was just for you, I'm gonna do it, but just for you. And they brought in a piano tuner and tuned it up as best as possible.
Yeah.
But even still, a lot of the keys still weren't working. The pedal was not working right, and it still wasn't a loud piano, so it's still not going to reach to the end. Anyways, he decides to go on. Keith Jarrett, he also improvises every show because he's a jazz guy. And so as he goes on, and they decide, hey, let's actually record this show so that we can send it to future venues and say, this is what happens when you don't read our writer and you don't give us proper equipment. Well, long story short, he starts playing, and because of the limitations that were put on him, he is playing so aggressively to get it to the back of the room and sticking to the middle of the keyboard where it's a rich, full sound, and he's avoiding the high keys, and he's really banging out the bass to make sure that the tempo is going and all that type of stuff. Anyways, ends up creating this piece of music that goes on to become the most sold solo piano jazz album of all time.
What?
And it's called the Colne Concert, and it's a absolutely beautiful piece of an hour long of piano.
I'm gonna go on a walk in a little bit.
That it basically just goes on just to give an example of putting limitations on something. Like, he's a master.
Yeah.
I bet he knows anything and everything you could possibly know about a piano. He probably normally plays on the best pianos that you could ever possibly want to play on.
Oh yeah, naturally.
And so, he had all of these things, and I don't, this is just a throwaway statement, but it's possible that if he would have never been given a crappy piano, we could be, well, one, we wouldn't be talking about him, but he could have gone on to just be forgotten.
Right.
He
wouldn't have sold the most sold jazz music.
He could have been known, but like generally forgotten as a musician because he was playing with, his skills and abilities on all of the best stuff, and it was never challenged to use all of that knowledge in a limited way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think maybe a little bit of the like gear or the need for more and better gear is like FOMO.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like we feel like, oh my gosh, if I don't have this thing, then I can't create my masterpiece, right?
Yeah,
But it's like, obviously he didn't need the amazing pianos. He just needed one crappy one.
Well, and I'm thinking about even those times back to, I feel like everybody covets, at least in conversations I've had, of like, I'm always just trying to get back to the musician Josh was when he was 14 years old in his room type of thing.
Yeah.
But I think the reason I'm trying to do that conceptually is because some of the best art that I made was whenever I went into, I keep coming back to that pedal just because that's what we're doing. But like when I had just gotten that DL4, some of that stuff was the best stuff that I had created was because I went into that space without an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
And so it's like, what does it look like to almost say, I'm coming in here.
Mm-hmm.
These are my limitations, intentionally putting them on myself. And I have no agenda. I'm not trying to write, this next whatever. I'm not trying to create with the thought process of how's this going to land on other people.
Yeah.
I'm literally just coming into here and I'm going to goof around with my newfound friend of these limitations. And like, I don't know. I'm wondering, I'm like having this thought process of, dang, I need to get back to the.
Well, I think part of it is like whenever you're younger, when you're a kid, there's like no inhibition. Like there's no limiting anything on you. You're not putting limitations on yourself, I guess I should say. You're also not aware of the expectations that are put on you from culture and society and all of that. So you're literally just in your room making stuff that is like true to your heart. And that's what like true art is. So like if you can figure out how to get to that as an adult without worrying about the gear and the obligations and the expectations, that's the goal.
Yeah, at least true until dinner, and then I gotta go downstairs and eat whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think there's something about all. I have an opinion, I think, or a thought that all of us are just trying to get back to like how we felt when we were kids. That's it. You know what I mean? And I think like looking at what you did as a kid is like a good way of starting out, because I think especially in art, because art is just like a commentary on life. You know what I mean? So.
Well, and that's something our friend Jones would say all the time in conversations that we're having, and it's aimed towards something else completely different, but it's this whole idea of like, him and I talk about this idea of wonder and like just realizing there's so much wonder surrounding you, but that's a whole different stream. But in that thought process of wonder, of what does it look like to get back to the place when we were kids in our creation, where this creation was simply for the case and reality of wonder. It's just like, oh my gosh, I know this sounds so stupid and it couldn't apply to anything, but I don't care about that right now because this like sounds so sick. How the heck did I get that type of thing? And like tweaking around and messing with things, and all of a sudden you just land on something, but the motivation was wonder, not production.
Exactly.
Well, I think also that a lot of, as we get older, the pressures and opinions of other people start to take a stronger and stronger hold on our minds.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that is where a lot of anxieties come from in the creation of art, is because it's not thinking about the wonder. It's not thinking about like, whoa, this is so fun to create this. It's like, oh, I don't know if I could possibly ever show this to somebody.
Yeah, like I don't want to be rejected.
How is this going to be received? How is this going to be, thought of? If I make this so weird, what if people are going to think that I'm weird? If I'm not actually good enough, are people going to think that I'm not good enough? And we instead of just exploring, instead of getting to that wonder, instead of just creating for creating's sake and not worrying about what other people think of us, we basically do that. Like we stop creating, and we start worrying about the gear. Is one avenue you could take those feelings,
right?
Because, like, if you were to show up to your photo shoot, let's say, and you have a Canon T3i, that only cost you $500. How are people going to perceive you as an artist versus if you show up with a Canon 5D Mark IV that you spent a few $1,000s on? Then are you going to be perceived as an artist? If you walk up on stage and you have like a Stratocaster, versus if you had something that you bought at Hastings in 1999, like how are you going to be perceived as an artist?
Yeah.
And as you look at people, like I think a prime example, especially with the music scene, and that's music. There is merit, like to all gear. I mean, there's a reason there is a T3i, and there's a reason that there is a 5D Mark IV, and there's a reason there's a beginner guitar, and there's a reason that you have a Stratocaster. But if you were to take somebody like Jack White, who
totally poops on all of that,
insane like musician and artist, who he is the epitome of proof that all of that crap doesn't matter. If you don't know how to create.
Right.
And he, like, I watched a video one time of him literally, in the video, he builds a guitar.
The glass bottle.
And then just starts playing it.
Yeah.
And creates this, like, really cool, interesting sounds with this thing that he literally made on his front porch.
Yeah. Well, I think you can also, I think it was a Switchfoot documentary that I watched.
Who's that?
Yeah. But it was kind of the same. They, like, went out and found just random things on the street that made interesting noises to them.
Yeah.
And then they brought it back and like tried to make a song with these like weird, not even instruments, There's like something about exploring and like not putting limitations on yourself in that way of like, I need this gear in order to make this thing. Like, no, you don't.
Yeah.
And usually those are the most interesting things, are the ones that are like not made with amazing gear.
Yeah. There's this guy on YouTube who's named Andrew Huang, and he literally walks around. I don't know anything. I think he lives in Vancouver. I don't know where he lives, but he walks around whatever city he lives in with a microphone and just listens to things and finds things and walks up to it and records it. And he just looks at something. He's like, I wonder what that would sound like, and hits it with something and records that thing. And then he puts out these pop songs and puts out all this music. And it's using these specific, completely random sounds, but he's just walking around with the like forefront, with the thought at the forefront of his mind of, what is the wonder that is going to come to me if by paying attention to what's around me.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is like, it's not that gear is bad or good or you need it or you don't. It's just that like having an open mind of what gear even means.
Yeah. It's like, back to music. If you have, just a beginner guitar or, whatever it is, and you're like, you play and you just can't get past the fact that you have this guitar, and you're like, basically you are obsessing over upgrading.
Yeah.
And there's, like I said, anyways, it doesn't matter. You're obsessed with upgrading. I think one question to ask is like, if, let's say, John Mayer walked in and I handed him this guitar, would he sound as good as I do on this guitar or better? And generally speaking, it's probably the fact that he's going to play the crap out of that guitar, and you're going to, ever wonder why you ever needed a better guitar. Like, why does he even need a better guitar?
Yeah.
It's like, because like I said, basically in the beginning, is like we rarely ever truly outgrow our gear.
Yeah.
And because there's this threshold in our mind of practice and patience and truly diving into our actual art. And there is something to be said about the excitement of something new as well.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes like if we're using the same piece of gear over and over and over again, we just like lose like kind of lose that wonder because it's like,
yeah, okay, I get it.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
the
then we like,
routine and
it's like you buy that new pedal and then all of a sudden you're like reinvigorated to like play guitar for 8 hours a day for like, you know, months straight.
Yeah.
You know, there is something to, you know, that could be said about that. But again, it just goes to obsessing over the gear to improve your skill is rarely actually the case.
Yeah. Well, it's like that cheesy line that I said earlier as we were talking about this is like the gear is only as good as the ear. Of like, yeah, it doesn't matter like what you have if your ear and, you know, musically that's literal, but you know, what your eyes, your whatever, whatever your, you know, whatever you got to use to create type of thing. If it's not refined, if it hasn't been developed, if it doesn't know what to look for, then like you can have the greatest stuff ever and it literally doesn't matter. And I think that's where I think a lot of people get mixed up in is they don't have the ear, but they think that the remedy for getting the better ear is getting the better gear. And so they go get the better gear and they have the good gear with the bad ear. And I'm trying to make sure I don't Dr. Seuss and stuff. But it's this whole idea of like, oh yeah, so like if I'm going to be able to get that sound, if I go get that thing and then you go get that thing, and then you need like to fast forward or rewind all the way back to what I said earlier of like, then you got to get the preset package and all that type of stuff. But then you're in this weird wormhole or this weird, just like, I guess, back and forth thing of I don't have the ear to make anything cool. I have gear that is capable of doing so much that I don't even know what to do. And so my bad ear, because it has access to something that is so adjustable, I have no idea where to start.
Right.
And therefore I'm actually not able to create anything because this thing is too complicated for my ear. And my ear hasn't been trained by something that's simple to even know where to go.
Yeah, I think the solution or the remedy is patience in that.
Yeah.
It's not getting better gear or whatever. It's literally just sitting there and devoting hours to like one button.
Yeah.
You
What was
know?
that line you were saying earlier about from Matty Healy or something like that?
Oh, yeah, Matty Healy from the 1975. He did an interview and he said the biggest lesson he's learned in like their art is just showing up and like literally turning up and sitting there for 3 hours, pressing one note, trying to find the sound that you want.
Man.
And like, that's what it is. That's what creativity is. That's what writing a song is. It's not, everybody thinks
So we
it's
did
this
at
like,
14.
yeah, everybody thinks it's this very mystical thing, which I like to think that it is too.
Yeah.
But like the truth of it is that creativity comes from sitting there for hours and hours and hours and like just trying and then not working and then trying again and then not working.
Yeah.
like that's all it is. It's
Which
not
that's
about
the
better
agenda
gear.
thing.
Yeah.
It's like, are you okay?
We are way more obsessed with producing than we are with creating like something good.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Well, and that's the thing is, in order to produce something great, you have to spend the time in that creative composition mindset, right? But you can't go into it. It's like this weird tension. It's all this irony, right? Like in order to produce something, you have to be in this space of creativity and for something to come up. But the only way that's going to come up is if you aren't thinking about producing, but you're just thinking about creating sounds. So now you can obviously, and I do this all the time where I have a sound in my head and it's, you know, this would fit really well for this production thing if I could get this type of sound there.
Right.
But it's less about the ethereal product that I'm trying to make, and it's more about the specific, you know, what would it look like to sound like to do that? I mean, somebody that does this that's so great is my roommate Jalen. Jalen, literally, he's been doing this thing lately where I guess he's been doing this thing for a long time, but he's getting back to it where he's stacking vocals upon vocals upon vocals upon vocals to where specific parts of a song, there will be specific words. And he's like crazy brilliant musician. And he'll say a certain word and it'll be a literal 13 tracks of different harmony parts. So maybe 3 words and there's 13 different harmony lines that are varying in different ways that all together just create this crazy synthesis thing that sounds so unreal. And he's kind of perfected it. But the reason he's perfected it is because when he was a kid, he was just sitting around and like, oh, well, that sounds cool. That sounds cool. That sounds cool. And it's kind of like in this time where he didn't have an agenda, he developed a skill set that then he can directly apply here in a moment whenever he has an agenda, but it's because it came from a time without an agenda.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think we're always constantly thinking about the posting of the art in the middle of creating the art.
Yeah. I think about this a lot in regards to musicians because, like with our stuff or whatever. Anyway, like if I write something, I'm immediately thinking about like, okay, how can I post it? When should I post it? You know, whatever. But then
is my mom going to read it?
Yeah. But then when you look at like a lot of musicians, what they do is they go away from social media, generally speaking.
3 years.
For years.
Oh, I love it.
And they disappear. They go away to the studio in their own little bubble. They write their thing. And then they come back.
Yeah.
And it's this process of like, I'm going to, silo myself off and create what I'm meant to create, without outside distraction. And then I'm going to come back and share that with you. It's this like, I think a lot of us have this. I don't think that we're supposed to get immediate feedback on our stuff. Like, I think that's the whole problem is like, we post it and then we're like just waiting for feedback. Mm-hmm. And then whenever it's not the feedback we wished it was, we think that we did something wrong. So then you start tailoring your content art to like what the platform says. And like, that's not how you should create art. I think that is when you lose out on all of the good art because you're not actually creating what you were meant to create because you're letting outside influences come in, to the process.
Which that's a whole stream.
It's a completely different conversation.
And that's a conversation we already had.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like when you're allowing the consumer to dictate what you create, then the only thing you're going to create is what they've already heard.
Yeah. I think there's nothing wrong with like maybe listening to your audience in some form or fashion. But it's like Steve Jobs. He was like, they don't know what they want or need until I tell them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I told them they need an iPod. I told them they don't need the floppy disk in their computer. And I was right. What I mean?
Isn't that the very story? Like I remember you guys telling me this story about,
Yeah, it's just the Apple, like in everything, but Steve Jobs, they famously never did focus groups. Like, because a lot of technology companies, they would go in and they would do focus groups and show them different things and be like, okay, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? And it's like a lot of those things, like even just the mouse of a computer, like in a focus group, they're just like, why? What is it? Like, I don't get it. And it's like, oh, and if they listen to that, then you just don't create the mouse.
Yeah.
Even though that ended up going on to, being the biggest part of computing is being able to point and click the graphical user interface. And just the fact that all computing technology from that point like exploded into the mass, like into where everybody could use it. And it's like
so much more user
and so and that it's not that specific thing, but there are so many things like that with Apple. And what Steve Jobs did is like, I don't listen to those people because people don't know what they want until I give it to them.
He was the epitome of an innovator, right? But I think like applying that to your art, like I don't think there's anything wrong with like,
hey, Mom,
seeing if an audience likes what you're doing necessarily. But I also think you shouldn't let it, there's just too many of us who are letting that dictate our art. And that to me is a shame because you're not creating what you were meant to create.
Yeah.
It's like the widest or the most, like let's say you post something, the widest amount of feedback doesn't equal the best art.
Exactly.
That is the widest acceptable art.
Right.
And what art is the art that dies? It's the die that is accepted by the most people.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't shake anything. It goes back to that quote that we've said many times in that great art comforts the disturbed and disturbs the comfortable.
Totally. And also I feel like even in like as an example, I kind of have like a little thing right now with all these like poems they're all just, the only thing they're about is like romantic love in like 1 line, 2 line fashions, you know? I'm like, there is way more to life than like, I don't want to like say anything rude
just
about
pull
anybody.
Cody and be bold and say it.
I don't want to say anything rude about anybody, but like just the idea of like, don't chase him because you're worth more. You know what I mean? It's like this whole idea. And I'm like, why is literally every poem that? That is not, that's not art. That's not poetry. Poetry is like raw and honest and uncomfortable and sort of like the most embarrassing thing you could ever write that's poetry, you know? But like we're all cool with just like, oh, his eyes are beautiful. You know what I mean? It just is driving me crazy because again, we're creating for the platform. We're creating.
Wow, that was great.
Yes, we're creating because the audience says this is cool, you know? And like, that's not art.
It's like a sweet nothing with a Pinterest background.
Yes, that's a very good definition. It's maybe art, but it's not the life-changing art that I consider art.
Yeah.
That you want to consume.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like too many of us get, I don't know, whenever you're all doing the same thing and you're all thinking the same thing and reading the same thing, nothing new happens.
Right.
And like that doesn't move anything forward. And I feel like that's where we're at with a lot of stuff. Even you can even look in like pop music and stuff.
Oh, exactly.
Like everybody's kind of writing the same song
sounds the same.
Yeah. And it's this, like we're writing for the streams. We're posting for the algorithms where it's just not the way art should be. I don't think is intended to be made. And it's kind of a shame.
We were walking down the street and we were behind this group of people, and this guy was, talking to these. I don't know if you guys overheard the conversation or not, but I heard this guy, dressed in just traditional, like I want to be famous clothing, and he's telling his friends of like, so like in my new music video, this is what we're gonna do, blah blah blah. And he said, and then what's gonna happen is at the end of it, someone will slap me in the face, and once they slap me, I'll wake up and I'll realize it was all a dream. And one person was like, "Oh my God, that would be so crazy!" And I'm like, "I've seen that music video 100 times."
Yeah,
that's like literally the biggest trope in Hollywood.
Yeah, which there's nothing wrong with a good trope. I will throw that out there.
That's how Game of Thrones is going to end. So
yeah, probably. We're all gonna wake up from a dream. I do think because like the story podcast episode that we did about like there are kind of 7 Hollywood tropes. There's like 7 storylines that each story takes, and I don't think there's anything wrong with a good trope. The problem is when you rely on a trope to
I don't think trope's the right word for that. Like like 7 different story arcs is different than a story trope. Like,
okay, that might be fair, but I still think there's
you
nothing.
have people, including me, define trope.
Okay, so like if you have 7 different storylines, and let's say like there's all those whatever, in each one of those there is a woman who's walking down the street and she's like so sad and like everything in her whole life is just going wrong, and in the pinnacle of her life going wrong, a taxi comes by and splashes her with a puddle.
Yeah, that's definitely a trope.
To visually show that now it can't even get any worse than this. It starts raining and I get splashed by a puddle.
That's
and a bird poops on me.
My story when I was walking through Chicago years ago, broken foot, starts raining.
Or like, the meet cutes. Those are all tropes.
Meet cute?
Meet cute. That's like how you meet somebody. It's a meet cute.
Oh, it's like running into somebody walking in the hall. Somebody walking in the hallway, and they bumping into each other, and they drop all their papers, and then they're both picking them up, and then they look up and make eye contact, and then they fall in love.
That's a trope. That's 100% a trope. But I'm cool with tropes. Yeah. I'm cool with tropes to a certain degree, but I do think, like if you're relying on a trope to sell your art, then it's not art,
So, and that is the easy thing to lean into.
Yeah.
Whenever you're constantly being told, or I guess better way of saying it, that's the easy thing to lean into whenever you are creating for the sake of receptivity and production's sake, And so then you're constantly thinking, okay, so if we want to use the music video kid, like, right? Okay, so then what gear do I have to buy so to make it look like that I wake up good? Okay, well, that's what happened in the, I'm blanking on every music video right now ever.
Yeah.
But that's what happened there. And so that's how can I achieve these things? And you're literally creating to recreate something that you've already seen.
Right.
And then the whole wonder thing isn't being engaged because you're running after something that's already taken place.
Yeah. I think in life, the true artists, like the ones that you look at and you're like, yes, they're an artist. Like there's no question, are the ones who are doing none of the formula things that we think we should be doing. They're the ones who are going away for 3 years. They're the ones who are like making these just wildly, insanely weird videos. They're the ones who are like not following typical promotions and marketing schemes and things like that. Like the true art comes from not following a formula.
Yeah.
You basically said it earlier, but it reminded me of the quote that you can tell me who it's by if you remember that. If you only read what everybody else reads, if you only listen to what everybody else listens to, if you only watch what everybody else watches, then you only think what everybody else thinks.
That's
You said that.
in Haruki Murakami's book, Norwegian Wood. He talks about that.
Yeah. And it's just
Great song by the Beatles.
Yeah.
And so I think just
It's
applying
true.
that, like if we're only consuming what everybody else is consuming, then you're
Yeah.
only going to think the way
Yeah.
that everybody else is thinking.
Well, and to that point, maybe a little bit more, the way we're consuming, just generally the way we're consuming is making us only think like everybody else thinks because we're consuming based on an algorithm that's telling us what they think we want to read. You know what I mean? So like on all accounts, like we're not, I guess, free thinking or whatever.
Yeah.
So the two things that I'm hearing, it's kind of like, what are the self-help?
Yeah.
If we're going to self-help title this thing, you want to be a better artist, the two things is find the wonder in being a kid again.
Yeah.
Like get back to your 14-year-old exploration self and start ingesting things that is completely different than what everybody else is ingesting.
Yeah. It's all of history, when you look, like the true artists are the ones that were going against the grain. The true artists are the ones who are saying the things that literally nobody else is saying, or maybe they think it but are afraid to say it, or whatever. It's like that Kurt Vonnegut quote that is like he calls artists the canary in the coal mine. And so like what the canary goes down and to see if it's like toxic or not. And like that's the artist. Like the artists are too sensitive. And so when the culture is going in a toxic direction, they're the ones they suffocate before anybody else does. And like that's what you pay attention to. And I think that is pretty much it. Like don't get so caught up in posting or in producing or in the gear that you need in order to create the message that you're trying to send. Like it just doesn't matter. Like what matters is the message. And yes, there is an argument for gear to an extent. Absolutely.
Yeah, of course.
But
gear is not your savior.
But it's not going to compensate for anything.
Yeah.
Like if you don't have your message right, if you don't
if you have a small penis, like a bigger camera is not going to like compensate for that.
Well, okay.
That's what this whole thing's been about. It's been one insinuation.
Yeah. I just think if you're not really working on the things that actually matter, your gear is pointless.
Yeah. And gear might help if you have something. And it's not just like content of what you're saying.
Yeah, totally.
But it's like, I guess what I'm trying to say is gear will not answer the question of what is my message.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
So you can have the gear, but if you don't have the message, then there's no point of even trying to say something.
Yeah.
And that's what I've seen so much. But also, if you know how to manipulate the gear, then the gear can help enhance your message.
Absolutely.
But if you don't know your gear and you don't have a message, then what are you doing?
Absolutely.
It's like, for me, it goes to, if you don't know what absolutely every single setting,
Mm-hmm.
button, string, apply it to whatever.
Yeah.
If you don't know what every single thing does, then we shouldn't be looking to buy something else.
Yeah, you don't
like
need a new
you
one.
haven't exhausted every piece of every piece of knowledge that piece of gear can give you.
Yeah.
If you don't know the absolute ins and outs before you buy something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, then again, it gets back to sometimes it gets too boring. You're just not inspired by that piece of gear anymore.
Yeah.
And you can't figure out how to create the same sound that the 1975 is creating with the gear that you have. So you have to look up what they have to buy that same thing so you can create the same sound. Like,
Right.
but again, it's just like, if you don't know,
Just being open-minded.
yeah, the finesses
Yeah.
and absolutely everything that you can do with that specific thing you have, then avoid looking for something else to add
Yeah.
onto it.
Because again, it starts to satisfy that feeling,
Mm-hmm.
which is, I think, a shame, because that feeling is where art comes from, right? Like you're like dissatisfied with something, so you're like trying to like communicate it. You're
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
in some way you're trying to put words or feelings or sounds or whatever to that feeling, but instead we just like settle for searching for new gear that we think will communicate that feeling,
Yeah.
instead of like actually communicating it.
Yeah.
What might be an interesting thought is that,
We'll decide if it's interesting.
Uh-huh.
well, I said it might be. It's funny
Not interesting.
how we obsess so much about the absolute best gear we can get today,
Mm-hmm.
but almost all of the best art ever created was created with worse gear than we can buy for the cheapest price.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
the best
Like-
albums of all time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, and like the camera on your phone, the processing power on your phone, all of that type of stuff is potentially better than what some of the older
Yeah.
great pieces of art are created with. And music, and then the one for me to think about is the best, or like the cheapest
Mm-hmm.
paint materials and paint brushes that you would go buy are probably better than the very, very best paintbrushes that the greatest Renaissance painters ever
Yeah,
had.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of think about
That
this
gets messy.
I kind of think about this in maybe the idea that, because I'm very much an analog person and not a digital person, and so I wonder if it's just because of that like human feeling that analog things have, like the old recording
Yeah.
things, like they have
Yeah.
this like grainy, like
Yeah.
this like you can't even explain it, like human
Just
feeling
warmth.
to it,
Yeah.
that digital kind of loses. You have this like the film photography and even like filmmaking, like Super 8 cameras or something. There's just this like feeling that I get from like old photos that you don't get from new photos with
Right,
your phone, because I think it loses that. I wonder if some of it's that. I don't really know, but
I have my friend Kevin can talk to you about this for like 7 hours, but it's the whole,
Yeah.
he was telling me about how literally in audio,
mm-hmm.
there are certain frequencies that digital
Mm-hmm.
cannot project.
Yeah.
And so, and we were having this conversation the other day, but there are things that analog with tubes and tape and all
Yeah.
of this stuff, musically speaking, that it's able to capture, and it captures it in a certain type of warmth because of how it was generated,
Mhm.
that digital's not able to. And it's because, I don't know, it's like that whole, like the
Yeah.
good old fashioned, the people that are like the muscle car type feel or
Yeah.
whatever, those things. It's just, there's
Yeah.
something about that.
Mhm.
I don't even know what.
I mean, I'm definitely like a little bit of a romantic, so I sort of romanticize the past in general.
Yeah.
But I also like, I'm just not super into like everything being electronic. Like it just loses its vibe for me. But also I do think there is something maybe like what you're saying, like the paintbrushes way back in the day, they had to be worse. Right? Because materials were like, we weren't as
Yeah.
advanced of a
Horse
society.
tails. and
Yeah, so
whatever.
I feel like they had to be worse, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so what if, and this is going to be so unpopular, and every YMCA trophy that you've received.
Josh's Twitter is at John Kluge. Go ahead and whip that
Go
up.
and
Get
whip
ready
that
for
up.
the hate.
Yeah, get ready for the hate. This is going to be very unpopular. But our YMCA trophy
Yes.
upbringing says
everybody gets an award.
Everyone can be anything. And
Yeah.
here's the reality. There were people pursuing music that weren't created to pursue music.
Yeah.
There were people that are pursuing photography that weren't created to pursue photography, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the reason why John Mayer can pick up the guitar and make your guitar sound like something that you can't is because John was wired for music in a way that I'm not saying that anybody that's ever had John Mayer touch their guitar isn't made for it.
Right.
But there's something about gifting that people were made to do. I believe that everyone has that with something, but there's so many people that are trying to assign themselves a role that they weren't assigned to.
Right.
And therefore are running after that, trying to make that happen whenever it's just like, dude, you don't have the gifting to do that. You don't have the special, fairy dust on your life to do that.
Well, I think that comes with what our culture glorifies too, like we glorify the people who are out in front of everybody. We glorify the people on stage. And so everybody, doesn't really matter who you are or what you're doing. Like everybody wants that feeling. Everybody wants to know what it's like to be known by every person on the planet, right?
Yeah.
But so like you're chasing this thing that you think is, whatever.
You think it's your purpose, but it's just your insecurity being fed.
It's really not. Also, I think you could be made, maybe your gifting is music, but it's just in a different way than John Mayer. But we all see this like example and we're like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
But it's like not true.
Yeah.
Like your talent, your purpose, whatever you want to say might be in art, but it's not going to look like anybody else's life path in their art because it's their art and yours is your art.
Exactly.
So like you need to be cool with I just thought of Cool Whip. Sorry.
You need to be cool with.
Cool Whip. You need to be cool with like doing your own thing and like actually not caring, which I know that's impossible, but actually not caring about the outcome.
Yeah.
And if you listen, read, watch any kind of anything with any artist ever, they're like, I literally just sat down and made the art.
Right.
Like they actually don't care about the outcome. They don't care about, and now that gets into different conversations of like true artists versus like commercial artists versus whatever. But assuming we're all wanting to like
true might be too harsh of a word. A fine artist versus a commercial artist.
That's just what they call them. Like that might get into like a lot more conversations. But I think generally speaking, you just can't let outside influences into your art, and that includes not following John Mayer's path to success.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's something that Paul McCartney said in this doc that I was watching called Sound City. It's about this unreal soundboard, the Neve board. If you're into music at all, like if you're into gear at all, watch it. It's unreal. It's on Prime.
And if you don't own a Neve board, then you will always create inferior art.
Yeah.
So you need to strive.
You are inferior.
You'll never be Paul McCartney.
You listen to me. You are inferior. No. Came out a few years ago. Long story short, this board was at this recording studio, and the amount of records that came out from the studio through this board, unreal. Nirvana,
Foo Fighters too, right?
They've done stuff there.
Okay, because I've just seen their documentary.
Yeah. In this documentary, at the end of it, they decide, Dave Grohl, who purchased the board from Sound City, decides to record a record using that board. Brings in Paul McCartney. Mm-hmm. They're there. They write a song. They do this amazing recording. It's super cool. They did live tracking, so they're kind of playing off each other's energy. Paul's killing it. At the end of the session, they're sitting there, and they're all just kind of in this, to use an ironic word, in this Nirvana experience. Mm-hmm. And they're sitting there just like, whoa. And Dave says, man, I wish it was this easy. And Paul looks at Dave kind of like confused. He goes, it is. Mm-hmm. And when he said that, a surge of screw you went through me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Of like, shut up, Paul. It's actually not that easy. But obviously he's saying that 60, 70 years on after he's done all of this music, right? So it's a lot easier to say, yeah, it is. But, and again, I'm just on like the stream of maybe I'm just in a mood of like poking at people right now. But in some way, not in all ways, because there is a point where you got to grow, right? Like I'm in piano lessons, and the reason I'm in piano lessons right now is because I wanted to grow as a musician.
Right.
But if in some way your experience as an artist, as a creator, doesn't have that Paul McCartney line of, yeah, it is that easy.
Yeah.
Then to me, that's a clear indicator you're running after something that you weren't made to run after.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that it doesn't mean you're going to effortlessly be a savant, right? Like, Ryan Gosling playing La La Land. He's an incredible musician, but the reason he was able to play the Mia and Sebastian piece at the beginning of the film was because he practiced 4 hours a day for months to learn it.
Right.
So I'm not saying that whatever comes effortlessly is your reality, but I'm just really on that right now because I'm in a culture surrounded by people in this like, what do I want to do with my life type of stream that are oh, I want to be a musician, and then you're tone deaf, and it's like, dude, you weren't made to be a musician.
Right.
But there's something specifically inside of you that you're denying because you're running after this thing
Right.
that your image is consumed with.
Right.
So it's kind of like, run after wonder. I forgot what the second thing was, but if it's not getting you anywhere, you weren't made for it, and quit.
If at first you don't succeed, good.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny, and whenever all of us are, we're all searching for our calling and our purpose.
Yeah.
And then one person, they really find like this immediate or this really big success in this thing. And then all of a sudden, dozens of us around that person suddenly find our calling.
Yeah.
And we're like, whoa, look, I think my calling might be this thing this person found success in because they are being like,
It became tangible.
Yeah, it's like, well, they're becoming rich or famous or, being recognized in some way through this thing, like a prime example. And I'm going to put this one out there because it puts me in, it kind of throws shade at me in being in the realm, is the fact that like, oh, look, Casey Neistat finds this amazing success as a vlogger on YouTube. And then all of a sudden, hundreds of people suddenly found out that their calling is also YouTube.
Right.
It's like for some reason, our callings are never the thing that isn't successful.
Right.
Wow.
That's so true.
But there is something inside of everyone that clicks.
Yeah.
And if you're, and I don't want this to seem like stay on negative, like just quit and, go hang out at McDonald's or whatever you do when you quit. I don't know what you do when you quit. But like inside of everyone, I believe that there is something that clicks.
Right.
Right. That just makes you come alive. And in some way, it's a little bit effortless. It doesn't mean it doesn't require hard work, but in some way it just flows out of you. Words just flow out of you. Creating good art and digital like videos and photography and design just flows out of you, right?
Right.
That, to me, I believe every single person has that.
Right.
Every single person has that.
Or they can buy it through a piece of gear.
Exactly.
I also, on that...
But you have to run after it and you have to find out what it is.
Yeah.
100%.
That's the thing.
I also think on that note, it's like... say your dream is to be a musician, but you're tone deaf. So like you're literally never gonna
Which I literally see.
Like you're not gonna be successful in that realm. Doesn't mean it's not something you shouldn't do. Meaning it's a hobby.
Yeah.
It's something you love. I think we also get that kind of stuff confused. Like I love
passion to career.
Music. I love it with everything. Like I literally listen to music 24/7.
Yeah. No, I adore your love for music.
I'm not a musician though. I'm never going to be a successful songwriter. Like that's just not me. So I find other ways to satisfy that like love of music. I watch music documentaries. I read music books. I listen to music 100% of the time. I go to concerts and I just lose my mind. Like that it doesn't mean it's not something you shouldn't enjoy. Because I think also as adults, we do that. We're like, if this isn't making me money, I don't do it at all. And that's not true. Like I love all kinds of art. I suck at a lot of it, but I'm going to do it anyway because I love it, you know? And like, I think there's something to be said about hobbies and just like enjoying something for the sake of enjoying something and not making it a passion or a career or whatever you want to call it. Like it can literally be for you and nobody else, and it's still worthy of being done.
Yeah.
You know?
It's got to click, man.
Yeah.
To completely kind of focus back on gear and wrap this up in something that isn't art. I was just thinking, you know, if you've made it this far, and you know,
What are we talking about?
Yeah, you know, talking about gear, but then the art stuff doesn't resonate with you. I was just thinking, all of us, I feel like everybody does this at some point, or a lot of people do this at some point, even if it isn't in the art realm. Let's say you really got into woodworking, and all of a sudden, instead of becoming an actual woodworker, you become a person who buys woodworking stuff.
Yeah.
And like you own all the saws.
You become a collector, basically.
You know, like all of the gear. You're watching all of the YouTube videos about how to make certain things, but that satisfies this need for you to become a master woodworker, but you never actually make anything.
Yeah.
You know, we really, you know, somebody who really gets into working out, you like buy all of the gear, the right shoes, you know, make sure they're perfect, make sure you look cute, all this type of stuff, but then you don't actually get out there and work out.
Yeah,
but
if you don't look cute, then there's no point in getting out there.
That's right. It's like, you know, it's like, wow, you know, you really get into rock climbing, you know, or whatever, and like, you're like,
are you throwing shade at me?
Yeah.
I've been watching rock climbing documentaries, and I've decided that's my new calling.
Nice. Well, and the first step is you got to buy every single piece of gear possible to go rock climbing before you ever try it.
Yeah.
And you know, I think that's something that everybody does. Is like,
I've been doing it recently with stand-up paddleboarding. I've been researching stand-up paddleboarding.
Really?
Yeah, nonstop. I told Cody not too long ago, I was like, I'm pretty sure stand-up paddleboarding is my destiny. And I've just been like, just researching it like you would not believe. Yes. I don't know if I'll ever do it or not, but like if we all do it. We all have the thing that we're like, yes, this is it. It's an interest. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Try it before you buy it.
Yeah.
Also, I was thinking too, like with writing, even like it's like, how would you obsess over gear with writing? But even you are sometimes are like,
it's
maybe
it's more ideas.
It's
than
like,
it is
but
gear.
even at the same time, you're like, maybe I need this certain like typewriter or electronic typewriter, or maybe 100%. I need this. You know, maybe I need to buy a different computer or whatever, like to create writing.
Yeah.
And it's like
sit here.
Well, the thing is I'm researching like, okay, how can I be less distracted when I'm writing? Because it's really hard not to be distracted in today's system. It doesn't even matter. Like if you're writing out somewhere or at home or on the computer or on paper or whatever, it's just impossible not to be distracted.
Nokia
so I've been like
phone.
Yeah, I've been researching like there's these typewriters that you can buy that are like electronic and whatever. Anyways, it's like no internet, whatever. And I was like, well, maybe I just need to buy one of those. But when you actually think about it, the least distracting thing in the world is a pen and paper.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't have even an option to like upload it to Evernote. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it is literally just pen and paper, and it's the least distracting option. But for some reason, I feel the need to research for 3 or 4 hours
instead of writing for 3 or 4 hours.
Instead of writing,
which
for
is
3
what
or 4
we all
hours.
do. It's
Yeah.
like, you know, instead of like
Y'all
actually
leave me
working
alone.
on my art, it's like it's like, wow, what'd you do today? Like, I accomplished so much. I researched for like 9 hours today. All of these things that I should be doing.
It's this fallacy that we
I
like
studied.
trick ourselves.
What are the fancy words we used for looked up on Google?
Yeah.
I did some research, i.e., typed in a question in Google and read the Wikipedia page.
the
And
first
then
article.
went down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So to sum up what we talked about,
Good gear doesn't matter.
yeah, good gear doesn't
If your
matter.
ear is
keep the
not-
wonder.
Yeah, keep the wonder. What was it? Yeah, like the ear is better, more important than the gear.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also in the limitations of things, I'll leave us with this quote. Is that perfection is not achieved when there's nothing left to add, but when there is nothing left to take away.
Amen.
Good night.
Thank you guys for listening to Deeply Curious. I am Cody Jensen.
I'm Sarah Jensen.
And I'm Josh Kluge, and you suck at everything that you're just kidding.
If you want to support this show on Patreon, you can do that by going to JensenAV.club and join the Jensen AV Club. That's going to and get exclusive access to
some art.
Yes, some more art. I need
Or
art.
content, whichever definition you want to use.
You know, and also deeper access to us, and mostly it just helps support art and helps us to create art that matters instead of creating art that sells. Thank you guys for listening to this episode, and we will see you next week.
Bye.